I followed my manager's communicate everything policy so thoroughly, I took down our entire department. I followed my manager's communicate everything policy so thoroughly, I took down our entire department. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to engage in workplace malicious compliance, but 6 months at TechFlow Solutions taught me that sometimes the only way to deal with an unreasonable manager is to give them exactly what they ask for. Let me take you back to January 2023, when I started as a senior technical writer at TechFlow, a mid-sized software company that provided workflow automation tools for healthcare providers. I'd been in technical writing for 8 years, and this seemed like a perfect opportunity: better pay, interesting work, and a chance to build documentation processes from scratch since they were expanding their product line. The job itself was great. I was responsible for creating and maintaining user manuals, API documentation, internal knowledge base articles, and training materials for our flagship product, MedFlow Pro. The technical writing team was small, just me and 2 other writers, Lisa and Devin, reporting to the Director of Product Communications, Janet Torres. Janet was a piece of work. The setup. Meet Janet. Janet had been promoted to her position about 4 months before I arrived, coming from a project management background with 0 experience in technical communications. From day one, she made it clear that she was going to professionalize our department and implement industry best practices, which in Janet's speak meant micromanaging every aspect of our work. She was in her early 40s, always impeccably dressed in business formal attire, even though our office was business casual, and had this way of speaking where she'd use 3 corporate buzzwords when one simple word would do. Everything was about synergizing our deliverables, optimizing our bandwidth, and ensuring strategic alignment across stakeholder groups. The first red flag came during my 2nd week. I'd finished a draft of a new user guide chapter and sent it to Janet for review, as was our process. She called me into her office, not a meeting room, but her actual office, because she liked having these conversations on her turf. "Marcus," she said, not looking up from her monitor, "I've noticed you didn't CC me on your email to the development team asking about the new API endpoint specifications." I blinked. "Oh, sorry. I didn't realize you needed to be copied on technical clarification requests. I was just following up on some parameters that weren't clear in the engineering specs." "Going forward," she said, finally making eye contact, "I need to be looped in on all communications with other departments. I'm responsible for managing our team's relationships with stakeholders, and I can't do that if I don't know what conversations are happening." It seemed excessive, but whatever. I agreed and went back to my desk. That should have been my warning sign. The escalation. Janet's communication crusade. Over the next 2 months, Janet's need for communication oversight expanded like an aggressive fungus. It started with wanting to be CC'd on emails, then evolved into requiring approval before sending emails to anyone outside our immediate team. Then she wanted to be invited to any meetings we attended. Then she wanted pre-meeting briefs about what we planned to discuss. Lisa, who'd been with the company for 3 years, told me this was new behavior. "She's gotten progressively worse since her promotion," Lisa confided during lunch one day. "I think she's terrified of losing control because she doesn't actually understand what we do." That assessment felt accurate. Janet had never written technical documentation and seemed to have only a vague grasp of our product's functionality. Her feedback on our work was limited to commenting on formatting choices and questioning why we were documenting certain features. When we'd explain that users needed that information, she'd nod thoughtfully and say something about managing our content strategy more proactively. The breaking point began in late March. Our development team had just released a major update to MedFlow Pro that included a complete overhaul of the user permission system. This was huge. It affected how hospital administrators managed user access, and our documentation needed a comprehensive update. I estimated I'd need about 40 hours of work spread over 2 weeks, interviewing the lead developer, testing the new system myself, drafting new documentation, getting technical review, and finalizing everything. I'd done this kind of work dozens of times. I knew what I was doing. But Janet had other ideas. The absurd demand. The communication matrix. On a Monday morning, Janet called an emergency team meeting. We gathered in conference room B, and she pulled up a PowerPoint presentation titled Enhanced Communication Protocol for Q2 Excellence. My stomach sank. "Team," Janet began, clicking to slide 2, I've been reviewing our communication patterns, and I'm concerned we're not maintaining sufficient documentation of our collaborative touchpoints. Devon caught my eye and made a subtle, "What the hell?" face. Going forward, Janet continued, whenever any team member needs to communicate with another department, whether through email, Slack, Teams, or in person, they must document that communication using our new communication matrix template. She pulled up what can only be described as a bureaucratic nightmare. The template was a detailed form requiring date and time of communication, names and departments of all participants, communication medium, email, Slack, meeting, etc. Purpose of communication, key discussion points, minimum 3 bullet points, action items resulting from communication, stakeholder impact assessment, follow-up requirements, risk factors identified, strategic alignment justification, and this form had to be filled out before and after each communication, then submitted to Janet for review and filed in a shared folder. "You've got to be kidding," I said before I could stop myself. Janet's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I understand this may seem comprehensive, Marcus, but this is standard practice in high-performing organizations. We need to ensure accountability and maintain a clear audit trail of all interdepartmental communications." "Janet," Lisa said carefully, "this seems like it would add significant time overhead to our workflow. For the permission system documentation I'm working on, I need to touch base with the dev team, the UX team, the QA team, and customer support. That could be 20 or 30 separate communications. Then you'll complete 20 or 30 communication matrix forms," Janet replied smoothly. "This is non-negotiable. Effective immediately, all external communications require a completed matrix form. No exceptions." Devon raised his hand like we were in elementary school. "What constitutes a communication that needs documentation? Like, if I pass someone from engineering in the hallway and ask a quick question." "Yes, that would require documentation," Janet interrupted. "Any exchange of work-related information qualifies." The room fell silent. "I know this seems like additional work now," Janet continued, her voice taking on that condescending tone that implied we were children who couldn't understand the genius of her system, "but once you adjust to the process, it will become second nature. And think of the benefits. Complete transparency, accountability, and a comprehensive record of all our departmental touchpoints. This is the kind of rigor that will position us for success when performance reviews come around." There it was, the implied threat. "Do this, or it affects your review." The reasonable pushback that failed. I tried to be diplomatic. I really did. After the meeting, I requested a one-on-one with Janet. I'd prepared a reasoned argument. The communication matrix would reduce our productivity by approximately 30%, which would directly impact our ability to meet documentation deadlines. I even brought data, time tracking from similar projects showing how many communications were typically required. "I appreciate your concern," Janet said, "but I think you're overestimating the time investment. I've calculated that each form should take no more than 5 minutes to complete." "That's if the communication itself takes 5 minutes," I countered. "But I'm having conversations that last 30 seconds. A quick Slack message to verify a parameter value. Stopping by someone's desk to confirm a technical detail. With your system, a 30-second interaction becomes a 5-minute administrative task. Then perhaps you need to be more thoughtful about which communications are truly necessary," Janet replied. "This will encourage efficiency." I tried a different approach. "What about urgent situations? If there's a critical bug affecting customer documentation and I need to coordinate with the engineering team quickly, then you'll document it appropriately," Janet said firmly. "Marcus, I'm sensing resistance here. I need to know that you're on board with this initiative. Are you able to comply with this requirement?" There was that word, comply. I took a breath. "If this is a mandatory policy, then yes, I'll follow it." "Excellent," she smiled. "I'm glad we're aligned." I left her office feeling a mixture of frustration and disbelief. That evening, I vented to my partner about the situation. "So quit," she said simply. "You've got experience. You could find another job." "It's not that easy," I replied. "The job market's weird right now, and this position pays well. Plus, I actually like the work and my coworkers." "It's just Janet." "Then what are you going to do?" I stared at my laptop, thinking. "I'm going to follow her policy." Exactly. The plan. Malicious compliance takes shape. That night, I couldn't sleep. My brain kept churning, and around 2 a.m., it hit me. Janet wanted documentation of every communication? Fine. I'd give her documentation. Complete documentation. Documentation so thorough, so comprehensive, so technically perfect that it would illustrate exactly how absurd her policy was. The beauty of Janet's communication matrix was that it had no upper limit. It specified minimum requirements, 3 bullet points for discussion points, for instance, but no maximum. It required certain fields but didn't prohibit additional information. And here's the thing about technical writers. We're really good at documentation. It's literally our job. We understand information architecture, we know how to capture details, and we're trained to be thorough. I spent that sleepless night outlining my strategy. Follow the policy with absolute precision. Every communication, no matter how minor, would be documented. Maximize thoroughness. Each form would be filled out with exhaustive detail, using the full capabilities of my professional documentation skills. CC Janet on everything. Since she wanted oversight, she'd get real-time notifications of every form submission. Maintain technical perfection. No snark, no obvious sarcasm. Just professional, detailed documentation that followed her requirements exactly. Never break character. Continue this until something changed. The next morning, I arrived at work with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. Day 1. The documentation begins. My first communication happened at 9:07 a.m. Sarah from the QA team slacked me. Hey Marcus, quick question. Is the user permission doc going to cover the admin override feature? Normally, I'd reply, yes, section 4.3. Instead, I replied, hi Sarah. Let me document this inquiry and get back to you shortly. I opened Janet's communication matrix template and began. Communication matrix form number 001. Date. March 27, 2023. Time. 9:07 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Communication type. Slack direct message, incoming. Initiated by Sarah Chen, QA Department. Received by Marcus Rodriguez, Technical Writing. Primary communication medium. Slack platform. Secondary communication medium. N.A. Purpose of communication. Sarah Chen from Quality Assurance initiated a direct message via Slack to inquire about documentation coverage scope for the upcoming user permission system update, specifically regarding the administrative override feature functionality. Key discussion points. Sarah requested clarification on whether the revised user permission documentation would include coverage of the admin override feature. This inquiry indicates that QA testing scenarios may be dependent on documentation scope to ensure proper feature validation. The timing of this inquiry, pre-completion of documentation, suggests proactive coordination between QA and technical writing departments. Sarah's question implies the admin override feature is a testable component in the current sprint. This communication represents a stakeholder need for documentation scope transparency. Response provided. Confirmed that Section 4.3 of the user permission documentation, Working Draft version 0.3, will comprehensively cover the administrative override feature, including step-by-step procedures, permission requirements, use cases, security considerations, and troubleshooting guidelines. Action items. Marcus Rodriguez to ensure Section 4.3 of user permission documentation adequately covers admin override feature, owner. Marcus Rodriguez, due date, April 3, 2023. Marcus Rodriguez to notify Sarah Chen upon completion of Section 4.3 draft for early QA review, owner. Marcus Rodriguez, due date, April 3, 2023. Stakeholder impact assessment. Hi. This communication directly impacts QA testing timeline and scope. Failure to provide adequate documentation could delay testing cycles and potentially affect release schedule. Follow-up requirements. Share Section 4.3 draft with Sarah Chen by April 3. Coordinate with Sarah regarding any additional features requiring QA-focused documentation. Monitor for additional inquiries from QA team regarding documentation scope. Risk factors identified. Risk of documentation scope misalignment with QA testing requirements. Risk of documentation delays affecting QA timeline. Risk of incomplete feature coverage in documentation. Strategic alignment justification. This communication aligns with organizational objectives of cross-functional collaboration, quality assurance excellence, and ensuring documentation accuracy. By proactively coordinating with QA, Technical writing ensures that documentation meets both end-user needs and internal testing requirements, supporting the company's commitment to product quality and user experience. I saved the form, uploaded it to the shared folder Janet had created, and Slacked her. Communication Matrix Form #001 submitted for your review. Then I Slacked Sarah back. Yes, Section 4.3. The actual communication had taken 10 seconds. The documentation took 12 minutes. By lunch, I'd completed 7 communication matrix forms. For a Slack conversation with the lead developer about API parameter formatting. For a hallway exchange with Devin about lunch plans, work-related because we discussed a documentation deadline while walking. For an email to customer support requesting recent user feedback. For a meeting invitation I received. For accepting that meeting invitation. For a question I asked during that meeting. For a follow-up question I asked after someone answered my first question. Each form was meticulous, thorough, and completely compliant with Janet's requirements. Janet Slacked me at 2:15 p.m. Marcus, I'm seeing a lot of communication matrix submissions from you. Is everything okay? I replied. Yes, just following the new protocol. Should I be doing something differently? No. This is good. Very thorough. Thanks. I want to make sure I'm meeting the standards you've set for the department. By end of day, I'd submitted 14 forms and completed approximately 2 hours of actual documentation work on the user permission system. My normal productivity would have been 6 hours of focused work. Day 2. The cascade effect. Lisa and Devin had watched my day 1 performance with interest. Over coffee that morning, Lisa asked, "Are you really going to keep doing this?" "I'm following the policy," I said simply. Janet said no exceptions. Devin grinned. "You magnificent bastard. I'm just being compliant," I replied innocently. Word had apparently spread because at 10 a.m., Janet called another team meeting. "I wanted to check in on how everyone's adapting to the communication matrix protocol," she began. "It's going great," I said cheerfully. "I'm finding it really valuable to maintain such detailed records of all my interactions. Yesterday I documented 14 separate communications. Really helps maintain accountability." Janet's smile looked strained. "That's quite thorough, Marcus. Perhaps you might be overinterpreting the scope of what requires documentation." I pulled out my printed copy of her policy. "I'm just following the guidelines as written. You said, any exchange of work-related information qualifies. I want to make sure I'm being compliant." "Yes, but use your judgment." "The policy doesn't mention using judgment," I said, still friendly. "It says, no exceptions. I'm just making sure I follow the rules exactly. Isn't that what you wanted?" I could see the wheels turning in her head. She couldn't call me out for following her policy too well without admitting the policy was flawed. "Well, just continue as you've been doing," she finished weakly. Lisa raised her hand. "Janet, I wanted to ask, I'm working on the permission system documentation too, and I'm having similar communication volume as Marcus. Should I also be documenting everything to the same standard?" Janet's eye twitched slightly. "Yes, everyone should be following the protocol consistently." "Great," Lisa said brightly. "I'll make sure I'm as thorough as Marcus." Devin nodded enthusiastically. "Me too. We should maintain consistent standards across the team." That day, our team of 3 submitted a combined 32 communication matrix forms. Days 3 through 5. The documentation avalanche. By Wednesday, the system was showing strain. The shared folder where we submitted forms now contained over 60 documents. Janet had requested we also Slack her when we submitted forms, so her Slack notifications were essentially non-stop during work hours. But here's where it got beautiful. Other departments started noticing. When I needed to communicate with someone from engineering, they'd respond. Then 5 minutes later I'd submit my communication matrix form. After a few times, they started asking questions. "Why are you documenting our Slack conversation?" asked Mike from the development team. "New department policy," I explained. "Every communication requires a detailed form." "That seems insane." "I'm just following the rules," I shrugged. Word spread fast. By Thursday, other departments were talking about it. I know because those conversations required communication matrix forms. Communication Matrix Form number 047. Date: March 30, 2023. Time: 11:23 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Purpose of communication: Jennifer Park from UX Design approached my desk to inquire about the technical writing department's new communication matrix policy after hearing about it from Mike Chen, engineering. Jennifer expressed confusion and concern about the administrative overhead of the policy. Key discussion points. Jennifer stated she was unaware she needed to wait for communication matrix documentation before receiving responses to technical questions. Jennifer expressed concern that documentation requirements might slow down the UX research process that relies on quick coordination with technical writing. Jennifer asked whether the policy was company-wide or specific to technical writing department. Jennifer used the phrase, bureaucratic nightmare, to describe her impression of the policy. Jennifer requested clarification on whether her team should expect delays in technical writing responsiveness due to documentation requirements. You get the idea. The thing is, I genuinely wasn't trying to be disruptive. I was legitimately following Janet's policy. But that policy was fundamentally incompatible with how actual work got done. Janet tried to course correct on Friday morning. Team, I've been reviewing the communication matrix submissions, she announced in our weekly meeting. I think there might be some confusion about scope. The intent isn't to document every minor interaction. But your policy says, any exchange of work-related information, I interjected, pulling up the written policy on my laptop. And it says, no exceptions. Are you saying we should be selective about following the policy? I'm saying use common sense. With respect, Janet, you told me earlier this week to continue, as I've been doing when I asked if I was documenting correctly. I'm trying to understand. Are we following the written policy or not? The other team members watched this exchange like it was a tennis match. Janet's jaw tightened. The policy stands as written. Continue following it. Absolutely, I agreed. Week 2. The spreadsheet of doom. Over the weekend, I'd done some math. At our current rate, our team was spending about 40% of our work hours on communication matrix documentation. Lisa had started tracking her time and confirmed similar numbers. So I did what any good technical writer would do. I created a comprehensive analysis. Monday morning, I submitted communication matrix form #089 documenting a conversation with Lisa about our documentation statistics. Then I sent an email to Janet and submitted form #090 documenting that I'd sent the email. Subject: Communication Matrix Impact Analysis. Attached: a detailed spreadsheet showing total forms submitted, 127, in 6 business days. Average time per form, 11.3 minutes. Total team hours spent on forms, 23.9 hours. Equivalent documentation work lost. Approximately 142 pages of user documentation at our average production rate. Projected monthly impact, 478 forms, 90.1 hours, 567 pages of lost productivity. Comparative analysis. 1 hour of communication matrix documentation equals 6 hours of actual technical documentation work lost. I also included a cost analysis. Our team's combined salary worked out to about $180,000 annually. At our current rate, the communication matrix was costing the company approximately $3,375 per week in lost productivity. I kept the email tone professional and matter of fact. Hi Janet, I wanted to provide you with some metrics on how the communication matrix implementation is progressing. I thought this data might be valuable for your reporting to leadership. Let me know if you need any clarification on the analysis. Janet didn't respond to the email. But she did call me into her office an hour later. Marcus, I need to talk to you about your interpretation of the communication matrix policy. Of course, I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Should I document this conversation? Her left eye twitched. That won't be necessary. Are you sure? It's a work-related communication. The policy says. I know what the policy says, she snapped. Then, collecting herself. I'm concerned that you're being deliberately obstructive. I'm following the policy exactly as written, I replied calmly. I even documented that in my analysis. Every form I've submitted meets or exceeds the requirements you specified. You're doing this to make a point. I'm doing this to be compliant with departmental policy, I corrected. You've said repeatedly that this is non-negotiable and that there are no exceptions. I'm taking that seriously. She stared at me for a long moment. What do you want, Marcus? I want to do my job, I said simply. Which is writing documentation for our users. But I also want to follow the rules. Those two things seem to be in conflict right now. If I revise the policy, then I'll follow the revised policy, I interrupted. Just like I'm following the current one. Janet leaned back in her chair, and I could practically see her running calculations. If she backed down, she'd look weak. If she stuck to her guns, the documentation productivity would continue to crater. And my analysis had made it impossible to ignore the numbers. I'll take your feedback under consideration, she finally said. Great, should I? Don't document this conversation, she said quickly. But the policy. Marcus. It was almost a plea. I stood up. I'll wait to hear about any policy revisions. The plot twist. Upper management enters the chat. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Richard Pearson, the VP of Product Development, stopped by our department. Richard was Janet's boss's boss, and he rarely interacted directly with individual contributors unless something was seriously wrong or seriously right. Marcus Rodriguez? He asked, poking his head into my cubicle. My stomach dropped. That's me. Can we chat for a few minutes? Conference room D? This was either very good or very bad. In the conference room, Richard pulled up something on his laptop. I've been forwarded some interesting documentation. A spreadsheet analyzing communication overhead? Yes, sir, I confirmed. I wanted to make sure Janet had good metrics on how the new policy was affecting our workflow. He studied the spreadsheet. This indicates a significant productivity impact. Yes, sir. We're spending about 40% of our time documenting communications rather than creating actual user documentation. And you've been following this communication matrix policy exactly as written? Yes, sir. Janet specified no exceptions. Richard was quiet for a moment, scrolling through something. I'm looking at some of these forms. They're very thorough. I tried to maintain professional standards, I said carefully. This one is about borrowing a stapler from a coworker. Devin borrowed my stapler to collate printed documentation. Since we discussed a work task during the exchange, I documented it per the policy requirements. I couldn't quite read Richard's expression. And this one is about attending a meeting where you didn't speak? The policy requires documentation of meetings attended. It doesn't specify that I need to contribute verbally for the attendance to qualify as a communication requiring documentation. Richard closed his laptop. Marcus, you've been here 6 months. Your work product is excellent. Your manager from your previous position gave you a glowing reference. Why are you documenting stapler borrowing? This was the moment. I could back down, or I could be honest. Because Janet implemented a policy that doesn't account for how actual work gets done, I said. I tried to push back professionally. I explained the productivity impact. She said the policy was non-negotiable and mandatory. So I'm following it. Exactly. You're making a point. I'm demonstrating what the policy actually requires when followed correctly, I countered. If the policy is good, then following it shouldn't be a problem. Richard smiled slightly. You're not the first person to complain about this policy. Engineering mentioned it. UX mentioned it. But you're the first person to actually follow it. I believe in following workplace rules, I said. Even when I disagree with them. Even when following them is disruptive. Is it disruptive because I'm following the rule, or is it disruptive because the rule itself is disruptive? Richard actually laughed. Fair point. He stood up. Continue what you're doing. Don't change anything. I need to have some conversations. That was Tuesday afternoon. The collapse. When Janet's empire crumbled. Wednesday morning, Janet didn't come in until 10 a.m. When she arrived, she looked like she hadn't slept. She called a team meeting for 10:30. The communication matrix policy is being suspended pending review, she announced, her voice tight. For now, return to your previous communication practices. Should we document this policy change? I asked innocently. No, Janet said flatly. What about the work we've already documented? Is there an archival protocol? Marcus, Lisa kicked me under the table. Right, sorry, just trying to be thorough. Janet's jaw clenched. I need to see improved productivity from this department. We're behind on several documentation deliverables. Due to the communication matrix requirements, Devin pointed out. Regardless of the cause, we need to catch up. I expect everyone to be working efficiently. The meeting ended, and Janet retreated to her office. Over the next few days, things got interesting. First, I learned from Richard's administrative assistant, who I'd chatted with about our documentation. Yes, I'd submitted a communication matrix form about it. That Richard had requested all submitted communication matrix forms for review. All 143 of them. Second, Janet had apparently been called into a meeting with Richard and the director of HR to discuss departmental process implementation and productivity metrics. Third, the rumor mill revealed that other departments had been complaining about the communication matrix policy affecting their ability to coordinate with technical writing, and those complaints had reached the VP level. Fourth, someone from finance had apparently done a cost analysis similar to mine and determined that the policy had cost the company approximately $4,200 in lost productivity in its first 2 weeks. Janet was in damage control mode. She stopped requiring approval for our emails. She stopped demanding to be invited to our meetings. She largely stopped talking to us at all unless absolutely necessary. The fallout, consequences and revelations. The most unexpected twist came about 3 weeks after the policy suspension. I was called into a meeting with Richard Pearson and Sandra Kim from our. My stomach immediately tensed. Was I being fired for my malicious compliance? Marcus, relax, Richard said, reading my expression. You're not in trouble. Sandra pulled out a folder. We've been conducting a review of departmental management practices, and your documentation has been enlightening. My communication matrix forms? Among other things, Richard confirmed. Those forms created a detailed record of how your department actually functions, what communication was necessary for your work, and how management oversight was being applied. It wasn't my intention to. We know, Sandra interrupted. But the documentation revealed some concerning patterns. Janet was requiring approval for communications that should have been handled at your level. She was demanding oversight of work she wasn't technically qualified to review. And she was implementing policies without considering operational impact. Richard leaned forward. Here's what we've found. After Janet's promotion, technical writing productivity dropped by 35%. Documentation quality remained high, but output decreased significantly. We assumed it was due to increased product complexity, but your communication matrix documentation showed that the decrease correlated with increased management overhead. I didn't know what to say. Janet has been placed on a performance improvement plan, Sandra continued. She'll be receiving management coaching and training. In the meantime, technical writing will report directly to Richard's department. We're also implementing a policy review process, Richard added. Any new departmental policies that significantly affect workflow must be reviewed by both HR and the relevant VP before implementation. Your spreadsheet analysis is actually going to become part of our template for policy impact assessment. I blinked. You're using my spreadsheet? It's exactly the kind of data-driven analysis we should require before major process changes, Sandra said. You demonstrated the importance of measuring operational impact rather than just assuming a policy will work. Also, Richard said, smiling slightly, we're creating a new position, Senior Technical Writer and Documentation Processes Lead. It includes a significant pay increase and would involve helping implement best practices across all our technical writing efforts. You interested? I was floored. Yes, absolutely. Good. Sandra will send you the details. The resolution. 6 months later. It's now September 2023, and I'm writing this from my new office. Okay, it's still a cubicle, but it's a bigger cubicle. Janet lasted another 2 months before pursuing other opportunities. She's now a project manager at a different company. I genuinely hope she learned something from the experience. Lisa and Devin are still on my team, and we've actually hired 2 more technical writers. Our department's productivity is up 45% compared to the Janet era. The communication matrix forms have achieved legendary status around the office. Someone from engineering printed out the stapler borrowing form and framed it in their break room. I've implemented new documentation processes that are actually useful, streamlined review workflows, better collaboration tools, and clear escalation paths for technical questions. We track metrics, but they're metrics that matter: documentation accuracy, user satisfaction, time to publication. Not a record of every conversation. Here's what I learned from this experience. Sometimes the best way to demonstrate that a rule is unreasonable is to follow it perfectly. Breaking a bad rule makes you look like a troublemaker. Following a bad rule to its logical conclusion makes the rule look ridiculous. Documentation is powerful. My communication matrix forms created an undeniable record of the policy's impact. Numbers and data are much harder to argue with than feelings or opinions. Choose your battles, but when you fight, be strategic. I didn't get angry, didn't openly rebel, didn't complain to everyone. I just complied. Thoroughly. Good management listens. Bad management dictates. Richard recognized the problem because he was willing to look at data and feedback. Janet created the problem because she was focused on control rather than results. Sometimes the system works. I was genuinely surprised that upper management responded appropriately. It could have gone the other way. They could have backed Janet and punished me for making waves. But they looked at the evidence and made the right call. Would I recommend malicious compliance as a general strategy? Not really. It's exhausting, it's risky, and it requires a lot of documentation, pun intended. But sometimes, when you've tried every reasonable approach and nothing works, giving people exactly what they ask for can be the most powerful response possible. The irony isn't lost on me that my act of resistance involved creating massive amounts of paperwork. As a technical writer, I suppose I weaponized my core skill, documentation. Janet wanted transparency and accountability in communication. I gave her transparency and accountability so thorough it broke her system. Edit. Addressing common questions. Q. Weren't you worried about being fired? Yes, absolutely. I was genuinely scared, especially when Richard first called me into that meeting. But I documented everything so carefully that they couldn't claim I was violating policy. I was following it exactly. That documentation protected me. Q. Did Janet ever apologize or acknowledge the policy was flawed? No. In the 2 months after the policy suspension, she barely spoke to me beyond what was necessary for work. She never acknowledged that the communication matrix was problematic. Some people can't admit when they're wrong. Q. How did your coworkers react? Lisa and Devin thought it was hilarious once they realized what I was doing. They joined in partly out of solidarity and partly because they were also frustrated with Janet. Other departments were initially confused, then amused, then grateful when the policy was suspended because it was affecting their work too. Q. What happened to all those communication matrix forms? They're archived on the company server somewhere. Occasionally someone from another department will reference them when discussing policy implementation. They've become an internal cautionary tale about management overreach. Q. Would you do it again? Honestly, I don't know. It worked out for me, but it could have easily gone the other way. If you're in a similar situation, document everything, try every reasonable approach first, and have an exit strategy. Don't depend on malicious compliance saving your job. Sometimes it doesn't. Q. Any advice for people dealing with micromanagers? First, document everything professionally. Keep records of unreasonable requests and their impact. Second, try to address issues through proper channels before escalating. Third, know when to walk away. Sometimes the job isn't worth the stress. Fourth, if you're going to push back, make sure you're following the rules so precisely that they can't retaliate easily. And finally, sometimes giving people exactly what they ask for is the most effective way to show them what they really need.